Section 3 of The Psychology of Peoples by Gustave Le Bon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Oxenhandler. Chapter 3. The Psychological Hierarchy of Races. Psychological classification is based, as are anatomical classifications, on the determination of a small number of irreducible and fundamental characteristics. Psychological classification of the human races, the primitive races, the inferior races, the average races, the superior races, the psychological elements the groupings of which allow of this classification, the elements which are of the most importance, character, morality, the intellectual qualities are modifiable by education, the qualities appertaining to character are irreducible and constitute the unvarying element in each people, their role in history, why it is impossible for different races to understand and influence one another, the reasons why it is impossible for an inferior people to adopt a superior civilization. When the grounds are examined in a work on natural history of the classification of species, it is at once observed that the irreducible and, in consequence, the fundamental characteristics which allow of the determination of each species are very few in number. Their enumeration always occupies but a few lines. The reason is that the naturalist only concerns himself with the unvarying characteristics, and pays no heed to the transitory characteristics. Moreover, these fundamental characteristics have as their inevitable consequence an entire series of other characteristics. The case is the same with the psychological characteristics of races. If details be gone into, innumerable slight divergencies are found to exist between different peoples and different individuals. On the other hand, if only the fundamental characteristics be considered, they are seen to be very few in number for each people. It is only by examples, we shall shortly adduce examples that are highly characteristic, that it is possible to show clearly the influence of this small number of fundamental characteristics on the life of peoples. The only way to set forth the basis of psychological classification of races being to study in detail the psychology of the different peoples, a task that would demand in itself several volumes, we shall confine ourselves to indicating their main lines. If only their general psychological characteristics be considered, the human races may be divided into four groups. 1. The primitive races. 2. The inferior races. 3. The average races. 4. The superior races. The primitive races are those in which no trace of culture is met with. They have remained in that state bordering on animality which was traversed by our ancestors of the age of stone instruments. The Fuegians and the aboriginal Australians are examples in point. Above the primitive races are found the inferior races, represented more especially by the Negroes. They are capable of attaining to the rudiments of civilization, but to the rudiments only. They have never been able to get beyond quite barbarian forms of civilization, even when chance has made them the heirs, as at St. Domingo, of superior civilizations. Above the primitive races are found the inferior races, represented more especially by the Negroes. They are capable of attaining to the rudiments of civilization, but to the rudiments only. They have never been able to get beyond quite barbarian forms of civilization, even when chance has made them the heirs, as at St. Domingo, of superior civilizations. Among the average races we shall place the Chinese, the Japanese, the Mongolians, and the Semitic peoples. In the case of the Assyrians, the Mongolians, the Chinese, and the Arabs, they have created high types of civilization which only the European peoples have been able to surpass. Only the Indo-European peoples can be classed among the superior races. Both in antiquity at the epoch of the Greeks and Romans and in modern times, they alone have been capable of great inventions in the arts, the sciences, and industry. It is to them that is due the high level reached by civilization at the present day. It is they who have discovered steam and electricity. The least developed of these superior races, the Hindus in particular, have risen to a level in the arts, letters, and philosophy to which the Mongolians, the Chinese, or the Semites have never been able to attain. No confusion is possible between the four great divisions we have just enumerated. The mental abyss that separates them is evident. It is only when it is desired to subdivide these groups that the difficulties begin. An Englishman, a Spaniard, or a Russian belong all of them to the division of superior peoples. But it is a matter of common knowledge that the differences between them are very great. To determine these differences with precision, it would be necessary to take each people separately and to describe its character. This is the course we shall shortly follow in the case of two of these peoples, in order to give an application of the method and to show the importance of its consequences. For the moment we can only indicate very summarily the nature of the principal psychological elements which allow of the differentiation of races. Among the primitive and inferior races, and to find such races it is not necessary to go to the pure savages, since the lowest strata of the European societies are homologous with the primitive men, a greater or less incapacity to reason is always met with, an incapacity, that is, to associate in the brain with a view to compare them and to perceiving their analogies and differences, the ideas produced by past sensations or the words that are their signs, and the ideas produced by present sensations. There results from this incapacity to reason a great credulity and a complete absence of the critical spirit. In the case of the superior being, on the contrary, the capacity of associating ideas and of drawing conclusions from their association is very great, while the critical spirit and precision are highly developed. The inferior races further display but an infinitesimal power of attention and reflection. They possess the spirit of imitation in a high degree, the habit of drawing inaccurate general conditions from particular cases, a feeble capacity for observation and for deriving useful results from their observations, an extreme mobility of character, and a very notable lack of foresight. The instinct of the moment is their only guide. Like Esau, the type of the primitive being, they are inclined to sell their birthright for a mess of pottage. When man is capable of weighing his future against his immediate interest, of giving himself a goal and pursuing it with perseverance, he has realized a considerable progress. The incapacity to foresee the distant consequences of acts and the tendency to be guided solely by the instinct of the moment condemns the individual as well as the race to remain forever in a very inferior state. It is only in proportion as they are able to dominate their instincts, in proportion, that is, as they acquire will power and in consequence empire over themselves, that peoples can understand the importance of discipline, the necessity of sacrificing themselves to an ideal, and of raising themselves to a civilized state. Were it required to measure by a single standard the social level of peoples in history, I should be disposed to take as standard the degree of their aptitude for dominating their reflex impulses. The Romans in antiquity, the Anglo-Americans in modern times, represent the peoples who have possessed this quality in the highest measure. It has largely contributed to assure their greatness. It is by their general grouping and their respective development that the various psychological elements just enumerated form the mental constitutions which allow of the classification of individuals and races. Certain of these psychological elements appertain to character and others to intelligence. The superior races are distinguished from the inferior races by their character as well as by their intelligence, but it is more especially by their character that the superior races are distinguished from one another. This point has considerable social importance, and it deserves to be clearly established. Character is formed by the combination in varying proportions of the different elements which psychologists are accustomed at the present day to designate by the name of sentiments. Among the sentiments which play the most important part must more especially be noted perseverance, energy, and the power of self-control, faculties more or less dependent on the will. We would also mention morality among the fundamental elements of character, although it is the synthesis of somewhat complex sentiments. By morality we mean hereditary respect for the rules on which the existence of a society is based. To possess morality means for a people to have certain fixed rules of conduct and not to depart from them. As these rules vary with time and place, morality appears in consequence to be a very variable matter, and it is so in fact. But for a given people at a given moment it ought to be quite invariable. The offspring of character and in no wise of the intelligence, it is not solidly constituted until it has become hereditary, and in consequence unconscious. In a general way, the greatness of peoples depends in a large measure on the level of their morality. The intellectual qualities are susceptible of being slightly modified by education. Those of character almost wholly escape its influence. When education does affect them, it is only in the case of neutral natures, whose will is almost non-existent, and who are ready in consequence to follow whatever impulse may be given them. These neutral natures are met with in individuals, but very rarely in an entire people, or should they be thus observed, it is only in times of extreme decadence. The discoveries of the intelligence are easily transmitted from one people to another. The transmission of the qualities appertaining to character is impossible. They are the irreducible, fundamental elements which allow of the differentiation of the mental constitutions of the superior peoples. The discoveries due to the intelligence are the common patrimony of humanity. Qualities or defects of character constitute the exclusive patrimony of each people. They are the firm rock which the waters must wash day by day for centuries before they can even wear away its external asperities. They are the equivalent of the irreducible element of the species, of the fins of fish, of the beak of the bird, of the tooth of the carnivorous animal. The character of a people, and not its intelligence, determines its historical evolution and governs its destiny. It is always to be met with behind the apparent fantasies of that most powerless chance, that most fictitious providence, that very real fate which according to varying beliefs guides the actions of men. The influence of character is sovereign in the life of peoples, whereas that of the intelligence is in truth very feeble. The Romans of the decadence possessed an intelligence far more refined than that of their rude ancestors, but they had lost the qualities of character of the latter, the perseverance, the energy, the invincible tenacity, the capacity to sacrifice themselves to an ideal, the inviolable respect for the laws which had made the greatness of their forefathers. It is due to their character that 60,000 English are able to maintain beneath their yoke 250 millions of Hindus, many of whom are at least their equals in intelligence, while a few surpass them immensely as regards their artistic taste and the depth of their philosophic views. It is in consequence of their character that they are the masters of the most gigantic colonial empire known to history. It is character and not intelligence that goes to the founding of societies, religions, and empires. Character it is that enables peoples to feel and act. They have never derived much advantage from too great a desire to reason and think. Footnote: the extreme weakness and slight practical interest of the works of professional psychologists is more especially to be ascribed to the fact that they have confined themselves almost exclusively to the study of the intelligence, and have almost entirely neglected that of character. M. Paul Hahn, in his interesting Essai sur les caractères, and M. Ribot, in a few passages, unfortunately only too short, are almost the only psychologists I can recall who have pointed out the importance of character, and noted that it forms the true basis of the mental constitution. Quote, "The intelligence," unquote, the learned professor of the College of France rightly declares, quote, "is only an accessory form of the mental evolution. The fundamental type is character, which the intelligence rather tends to destroy when it is too developed." Unquote. It is to the study of character that attention must be directed, as I am attempting to show in these pages, when it is desired to describe the comparative psychology of peoples. It would be difficult to understand that a science so important for history and politics and its derivations should never have been made the object of study, were it not for the knowledge that it can be acquired neither in laboratories nor in books, but only in the course of long travel. There is no indication, moreover, that it is on the eve of being taken up by the professional psychologists, who at the present day are more and more abandoning what used to be their domain and confining themselves to anatomical and psychological researches. End of footnote. It is the mental constitution of races that determines their conception of the world and of life, and in consequence their conduct. We shall shortly support this statement by important examples. Impressed in a certain manner by external things, the individual feels, thinks, and acts in a very different manner from that in which will feel, think, and act those who possess a different mental constitution. The consequence is that it is impossible that mental constitutions, constructed as they are on very varied lines, should arrive at mutual comprehension. The century-old conflicts of races are the result more particularly of the incompatibility of their respective characters. It is impossible to arrive at any understanding of history unless it be continually borne in mind that different races cannot feel, think, or act in the same manner, and that in consequence they cannot comprehend one another. Doubtless the different peoples have in their languages common words which they imagine are synonymous, but these common words arouse entirely dissimilar sensations, ideas, and modes of thought in those who hear them uttered. It is necessary to have lived among peoples whose mental constitution differs to a sensible degree from our own, even though frequenting amongst them only such individuals as speak our language and have received our education, to appreciate the depth of the gulf that separates the thought of the various peoples. It is impossible to obtain some idea of this phenomenon without having recourse to extensive travel, by observing the great mental separation that exists between the civilized man and woman, even when the latter is highly educated. The man and the woman may have common interests and sentiments, but never like chains of thought. They might converse with one another for centuries without understanding one another, because they are constructed on lines too different to allow of their being impressed in the same manner by external things. The difference in their logical faculties is alone sufficient to create between them an insuperable gulf. This abyss between the mental constitution of the different races explains how it is that the superior peoples have never been able to impose their civilization on inferior peoples. The idea, still so widespread, that education can achieve this result is one of the most baneful illusions that the theoreticians of pure reason have ever brought into existence. Thanks to the memory possessed by the most inferior beings, a privilege in no wise confined to man, it is doubtless possible for education to impart to an individual somewhat low down in the human scale the totality of the notions possessed by a European. A Negro or a Japanese may easily take a university degree or become a lawyer. The sort of varnish he thus acquires is however quite superficial and has no influence on his mental constitution. What no education can give him, because they are created by heredity alone, are the forms of thought, the logic, and above all the character of the Western man. Our Negro or our Japanese may accumulate all possible certificates without ever attaining to the level of the average European. It is easy to give him in 10 years the culture of a well-educated Englishman. To make a real Englishman of him, that is to say, a man acting as an Englishman would act in the different circumstances of life, 1,000 years would scarcely be sufficient. It is only in appearance that a people suddenly transforms its language, its constitution, its beliefs, or its arts. For such changes to be really accomplished, it would be necessary that it should be able to transform its soul. End of section 3.